weaknesses, stroke failures of the Versailles peace settlement. So, in this final part of our discussion about the Versailles Peace Treaty or the Versailles Peace Settlement in general, we are going to look at the weaknesses or failures of the Versailles Peace Settlement. And the first weakness was that it created resentment in Germany. So one of the greatest weaknesses of the Treaty of Versailles was that it created deep resentment among the German people. Remember that many Germans believed that the treaty was unfair, humiliating, and deliberately designed to destroy their country's prestige and power. So Germany was forced to accept full responsibility for the war, pay enormous reparations, surrender valuable territories, and lose all its colonies, and also drastically reduce its military. So Germans referred to the treaty as the diktat. So diktat, it is a German term which means dictated peace, because they were not allowed to negotiate its terms. This humiliation created feelings of anger, revenge, and nationalism. Many Germans vowed to overturn the treaty whenever the opportunity arose, and Adolf Hitler later gained widespread support, by promising to destroy the Versailles settlement. Consequently, instead of promoting reconciliation, the treaty sowed the seeds of future conflict. Then the second weakness was that it contributed to the rise of dictators. So these dictators actually gained momentum in the interwar period, and the notable ones were Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. Benito Mussolini from Italy and then Adolf Hitler from Germany. So this became a major weakness because the treaty indirectly encouraged the rise of authoritarian dictators in Europe. The harsh economic and political conditions imposed on Germany, weakened the confidence in the democratic Weimar Republic. Economic hardships caused by reparations, talk about unemployment, also talk about the hyperinflation, and then not leaving out the national humiliation made which made many Germans lose faith in democratic governments. So Hitler exploited this dissatisfaction by promising to restore Germany's lost territories, rebuild its military, cancel reparations, and restore national pride. Similarly, dissatisfactions with the post-war settlements also strengthened nationalist movements in Italy, helping Benito Mussolini to rise to power. Thus, instead of strengthening democracy, the treaty unintentionally created the conditions that actually favored the extremist leadership. Then another weakness that I am going to talk about was that the treaty failed to secure lasting peace. So remember, from our very beginning in this discussion, we know that the primary purpose of the Treaty of Versailles was to establish permanent peace in Europe, yet it ultimately failed to achieve this objective. Although Europe enjoyed relative peace during the 1920s, many of the underlying causes of conflict remained unresolved. Remember, Germany continued to resent the treaty. Several territorial disputes persisted, and the League of Nations lacked the power to enforce peace effectively. So during the 1930s, Germany openly violated the treaty by rearming, remilitarizing the Rhineland, and expanding territorially. So these developments eventually led to the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. Therefore, the treaty succeeded only in delaying another major conflict rather than preventing it permanently. So in simple terms, this treaty succeeded in delaying the Second World War, but it did not prevent it as the intention was. Then another weakness was the reparations. Was about the reparations. So the reparations were too harsh. The reparations that were imposed on the defeated powers, especially Germany. So the treaty's reparations policy has been widely criticized as one of its greatest weaknesses. So Germany was required to pay approximately 132 billion gold marks to compensate the Allied powers for the war damages. So these payments placed enormous pressure on the already weakened German economy. Remember, the government struggled to meet its obligations, leading to heavy taxation. So they overtaxed the people. Borrowing became common. Hyperinflation had struck the economy. Also talk about unemployment. So by 1919, more than 3 million German citizens or 3 million Germans were unemployed. So that is massive unemployment, and eventually the devastating hyperinflation of 1933. So economic suffering affected millions of ordinary Germans, many of whom blamed the Weimar Republic and the Allies for their hardships. So rather than promoting recovery, reparations continued to long-term economic instability and political extremism. Then another weakness that I'm going to talk about is about the war guilt clause. Now, the war guilt clause bitterness, or the war guilt clause imposed by the Versailles Treaty caused bitterness. Remember that Article 231 of the treaty, commonly known as the war guilt clause, required Germany to accept full responsibility for causing the First World War. So remember that this provision deeply offended German people because many believed that responsibility for the war should have been shared among all the major European powers because all of them participated. So Germany viewed the clause as unfair and humiliating since it damaged their national honor and justified the reparations imposed upon them. Now, the bitterness created by the war guilt clause weakened the support for democratic governments and increased nationalist sentiment. Hitler later used this widespread resentment to gain political support by promising to reject the treaty and restore Germany's dignity. So the next weakness of the Versailles Treaty was the principle of self-determination, which was applied inconsistently. So remember that although Woodrow Wilson promoted the principle of national self-determination, it was not applied equally throughout Europe and the colonial world. While countries such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, Finland, and Yugoslavia gained independence, millions of people were left under foreign governments. Large German-speaking populations found themselves in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria without being consulted. Likewise, colonies in Africa and also Asia were not granted independence, but were, instead placed under League of Nations mandates controlled by Britain, France, Japan, and other powers. So this inconsistent application created accusations of hypocrisy and left many ethnic groups dissatisfied, thereby creating new tensions of eliminating old ones. So this created new tensions. I mean, it created new tensions instead of eliminating the old ones. Then another weakness was that the peace was dictated, not negotiated. So this is a serious weakness, or this was a serious weakness. The Treaty of Versailles was imposed upon Germany rather than negotiating with it. So rather than negotiating with it, Germany was excluded from most of the Paris Peace Conference discussions and was only invited to sign the completed treaty. German representatives were given little opportunity to amend or negotiate its provisions and were threatened with renewed military action if they refused to sign. So this lack of negotiation undermined the legitimacy of the treaty in German eyes, since many Germans, considered it an imposed settlement rather than a mutually agreed peace. They never accepted its terms wholeheartedly and constantly sought opportunities to revise or overturn it. So for information, even the signatories, the signatories of the German delegates who signed the treaty on behalf of Germany became very unpopular back when they went back to Germany or back home. They became very unpopular and they were popularly called the November criminals. Remember that the treaty was signed in November, so they were called the November criminals. Then another weakness that should not be sidelined was that the treaty created new political tensions in Europe. Although the treaty created several new independent states, it also generated new political and ethnic tensions across Europe. Countries such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia contained numerous ethnic minorities with different languages, cultures, and historical realities. New boundaries often divided communities or placed minority populations under governments they did not support. So Germany also objected to the Polish corridor, which separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. So these unresolved border disputes and minority issues created instability throughout Eastern and Central Europe, providing future dictators with excuses for territorial expansion during the 1930s. So lastly, the final weakness that I'm going to discuss is that individual national interests overridden the general goal of restoring peace in Europe. So remember that one of the most significant criticisms of the Treaty of Versailles is that the major Allied leaders often placed their own national interests above the broader objective of creating a stable and lasting peace. So France, under George Clemenceau, prioritized weakening Germany to guarantee French security. Britain, led by David Lloyd George, wanted to protect the British Empire and maintain naval supremacy while satisfying public demands to make Germany pay. So remember that I also talked about Lloyd George's campaign slogan of the elections. So his campaign slogan was "Hunger the Kaiser and make Germany pay." So Italy and Japan were mainly interested in territorial rewards, while the United States promoted Wilson's idealistic vision but failed to secure universal support for it. So as a result, obviously, the final treaty became a compromise between competing national ambitions rather than a balanced peace settlement. This pursuit of self-interest produced a treaty that satisfied few nations completely, but left many political problems unresolved. Instead of creating genuine reconciliation, it encouraged future rivalries and instability. So, finally, or in simple terms, the Treaty of Versailles contained serious weaknesses that eventually overshadowed many of its immediate successes. Its harsh treatment of Germany created resentment, economic hardship, and political instability that encouraged the rise of dictators such as Adolf Hitler. So, the inconsistent application of self determination and the imposition of an uncompromising peace, the creation of new ethnic disputes, and the prioritization of national interests over collective peace all undermined the treaty's effectiveness. So consequently, while the Treaty of Versailles ended the First World War, its weaknesses played a major role in paving the way for the Second World War just 20 years later. Okay, to better illustrate what I'm saying about this, the French premier or the representative of France, Georges Clemenceau, the 80-year-old Georges Clemenceau, was quoted as saying, "The good Lord had only 10." So here he emphasized the fact that God gave us 10 commandments. We broke them. Wilson has given us 14. We shall see.